Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. This is John Corcoran. I am the co-host of this show. And for those of you who haven't listened to this program before, you can check out our archives. We've got great interviews with smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of different companies. And of course, this episode brought to you by EO San Francisco. EO San Francisco is the San Francisco chapter of the Global Entrepreneurs Organization, known as EO colloquially. About 16,000 members worldwide, all entrepreneurs who've reached $1 million or more with their business, who are connecting with one another, doing learning events, social events, and growing together. And my guest here today is Chef Kiersten Firquain, and she's had a number of different businesses over the years, starting in the Midwest. Now she's located out here in the San Francisco Bay Area. She relocated to Napa County, California, beautiful Napa during COVID, because why not, right? Amazing place to move to. And we're going to talk about different catering companies she's had, some food companies for kids, started with a daycare. We'll talk about all that and get into it now. So Kiersten, it's such a pleasure to have you here. But first, let's start with, you grew up, your mom was a teacher, your dad was in a government job, so you weren't raised around entrepreneurs unless there were other family members or friends that you saw. But you had a heck of a work ethic, because by age 14, you're out lifeguarding and doing water safety instructions. What motivated that? Was there anything, do you remember as a young kid being like, I just want money to spend on things, or what kind of like motivated you to go get a job at 14?
Well, back then, I think my allowance was like $1 a week. I don't know. That wasn't going to cut it. So yeah, I knew I had to go to work, and I'm from Kansas. We're hard workers in Kansas.
So you're lifeguarding and water safety and things like that. Any memories from doing that? Was that all fun and games, or?
It was pretty fun. Yeah. I recall it being really fun, just being able to be outside, interacting with all the other kids in the small town. And I babysat as well. And I did all three of those jobs up until I went to college.
Cool. And you didn't get into starting companies. You've now started a half dozen different companies, but you didn't get into starting companies until after you got out of college. It was actually, you were working for a car company that wanted to relocate you to Detroit, and you had second thoughts about that.
That's right. I had a great job. I got my master's degree with that company. I traveled all over the world with that company, had a bunch of free cars, as you have when you work in the car industry. But once they kept wanting to transfer me to Detroit, I knew if I did that, I probably wasn't going to leave, and I would stay with that company for the rest of my life. And I didn't think that's what I wanted to do. So I decided I was going to quit and move back to Kansas City and start my own business.
And now there's two different ways you can go with that sort of thing. When people start a new company, a lot of times they do an extension of something they were doing before. The other, I think, more challenging approach is to start something in a completely new area, which is what you did. You took the hard road.
I did. I started a early education center, and that was my first 5-year plan. And I knew nothing about opening or running a business, although I did have a business degree. So yeah, I just got entrenched. I wrote my first business plan. I went to any women's business center seminar that I could find, and I just started learning how to run a business.
And was it rough in the beginning? Was it a rough learning period for you? What was it like?
I remember that the roughest part was when the kids wouldn't take a nap.
That is rough for sure.
It was rough when you got 6 little kids that don't want to nap, but
I thought you were going to say something like getting customers, but no.
that wasn't hard. I loved it.
And you had no kids at this point.
No, I was getting ready to have a child, and so I was. And
you'd spend years in working for this car company. What did you do? Just go knock on doors and say, "I got a child care center. You want give me your kid?"
I think I did. It was so long ago, John, not to date myself, but I don't. And once I got a few customers, then it was word of mouth, and referrals is how we got them.
Yeah. So, and once you started doing this, do you recall Were you like, this is for me? I love running my own business, or were there challenges?
There's always challenges, obviously, usually money. But that's when I tapped into local childcare groups and found out you could apply for grants. And so that was a whole new world that opened up, applying for grants to help sustain the business.
Hmm.
And that first business led me into my second business, which was called Bistro Kids.
So tell us about that. This is the first farm to school
Lunch
uh,
program.
lunch program in the middle. Okay.
That's right. But we started out doing kids cooking classes. So when
Mm.
I was doing daycare, I would have people come in to entertain the kids, right? The gym bus would come or they'd take swimming lessons, but they always loved to cook. And so I started doing hands on cooking classes myself and traveling around to all the other daycare centers and providing that activity. And then that morphed into birthday parties. We did cooking birthday parties. And because of that, then I started doing summer camps at some of the schools in the towns. And then eventually one of those schools said, "Hey, our lunches are terrible. Can you do healthy school lunches?" And I said, "Heck yeah." And I knew nothing about doing healthy school lunches. I remember trying to figure out how to write a contract like that I was going to give to this school to do their lunches and pretty much made it up as I went along.
I mean, that's not easy, especially if you've got other businesses at the same time. Organizing the food, fresh food, distribution challenges, keeping it cold, keeping it hot. I mean, that it's a very difficult business to go into.
It was, and we were a little bit ahead of our time back then. People didn't really think that school lunches could be healthy, and so
Mm,
what we did is we put a chef in every school. We had a garden in every school. We asked for curriculum time, which is a huge deal to get, and we did hands-on cooking classes with those kids.
mm,
And each class had their own little garden plot, and yeah, it was pretty successful program.
mm. And what's happening to the daycare center at the same time? Are you running that? Are you running both at this time? Did you get
So,
people to
so
run?
Yeah, so I closed the daycare center after 5 years and went full time on Bistro Kids.
Mm.
And yeah, just
Of course, that's a very different sale. Now, instead of going and selling to new moms with a baby who needs childcare, you're going around to school boards, school districts, and trying to convince them to sign up for this new healthy lunch program. What was that like changing that type of buyer?
that we learned real hard that there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape in a school administration system. And so what we did is we focused on small, independent, and private schools.
Mm,
Uh, Schools that we knew parents would be willing to pay $5 for a lunch as
mm,
opposed to the $1 per lunch that the public schools had um, to it, we're able to spend. But the good thing about learning about grant writing for the early education center is we started getting grant writing to do funding for after school programs. So we partnered with the YMCA and we started doing healthy snacks for all of their after school programs because we
mm.
were able to get some grant funding.
And at what point does this transition into your next company, which is a happy food company, which is the kind of a meal kit company similar to like a Blue Apron?
Well, we started taking business away from bigger food service management companies in the area. And so we started getting attention. And eventually we sold to a bigger food service management company. And I had an exit in 2011. I worked for that company for 3 years and then knew I wanted to do one more big thing.
Let me pause right there.
Yeah.
So many entrepreneurs I've interviewed sell a company and then they have to go work at that new company that acquired them. And I'm sure it's no surprise to hear that it was miserable.
It was
Uh,
awful. Oh my gosh. I learned so much about why you should never go work for the company you sell to.
mm,
But
so why?
again,
What was it about it? The experience for you?
boy, it's really hard to go from being the owner of something that you've created from nothing to being an employee with a
Mm,
boss. I literally pretended I didn't have a boss. When we when we would go in for performance reviews, I would just ignore everything that he said. So I was not an ideal employee, as many entrepreneurs probably are not. And I just, for 3 years, did everything I could to make sure that all the chefs and teammates that I had hired were going to be okay once I exited the company. And that's the case today. The brand is still functioning in some of the same schools that we signed up.
Wow. So this is the Bistro Kids company then? Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens to Happy Food Company during this period?
So
Or
then once I exited that company, I met with a guy who was looking to launch a new concept, and he had a meal kit concept, and he was shopping it around. And somebody said, "Well, you're a tech guy. You don't know anything about food. Have you talked to Kiersten?" And so we met, and he likes to tell the story that when he pitched me, I just laughed in his face and said, "Good luck." But eventually he convinced me to partner with him. And yeah, we
he must
started.
have been pretty persuasive if that was your first response and then you end up partnering with him.
I did. Well, I knew I wanted to do one more thing, right? I keep saying that every company. I'm like, I'm going to do one more thing. And so, yeah, we worked on building a meal kit company that sold to retailers, primarily grocery stores and some small businesses.
So again, a different type of buyer. But were you focused
Completely.
on the food preparation side or were you
Yeah.
involved in other areas too?
Yeah. So by this time, I had gone to culinary school. I was still operating a catering company that I had been operating for quite a while. And yeah, my main job in this company was to build a team, to maintain a culture, and to recipe test, come up with all new recipes that would work for this meal kit model that people, again, had never heard of.
Yeah. Was that a challenge since now it's common, but back then explaining the idea to people, is that difficult or to
It was
retailers?
Oh, it was terrible. So we would put a cooler in a grocery store, and then we would just send somebody, a demo team, to go stand there and explain what a meal kit was. It was all about education. Again,
Mm,
once we got somebody to taste a meal kit or purchase a meal kit once, we had about 70% repeat business, but it was about getting that first customer to buy your product.
mm. Um, so how did you manage to have your catering company at the same time as you had the Happy Food Company and other companies at the same time? Perhaps even maybe you were doing both at the same time while you were working in the acquiring company of Bistro Kids.
Working 7 days a week.
Mm, a lot of
Yeah.
hours.
A lot of hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no secret there.
No, just
Just too many
again,
hours.
never not working.
Never not working. I was hoping for something like, oh, get a great management team and then delegate it all. I was hoping for something like that.
Well, no, because when you're a startup, you can't afford that. You can't
Yeah.
afford, to hire your replacement yet. You're still
Yeah.
working towards that.
Yeah. So even the caterers, so what's kind of fascinating to me about these different companies is they each have a slightly different buyer, even with food, even though food was similar. First, you're selling to new moms who are taking care of their kids. Then you're selling to school districts. Then you're selling to retailers. And then the catering company is a different buyer altogether.
That's absolutely right. So I've always been in the food industry, but always in an outlying type of capacity, I would say. The one unifying thing is locally sourced, farm to table, sustainable, good for you food.
That's kind of the through line that you found your passion around.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it, farm to table is a term that we hear all the time, especially here in the San Francisco Bay Area. But at the time when you started doing it in the Midwest and around Kansas City, was it hard to find on the supply side? Was it hard to find that type of food?
It was. And so we found one farmer group who had formed a co op. So the main struggle in the Midwest with sourcing local food is distribution, right? All the little local farmers go to the farmers market, but they don't have the time or wherewithal to travel to everybody that may or may not want to buy their products.
Yeah.
And so they started partnering with a local grocery store chain. And then we partnered with that local grocery store chain. And so we started to figure out the distribution piece of being able to get this amazing, local family farm food into our meal kits.
Mm. Um, so you had your catering company, and then March of 2020, COVID hits.
Yeah.
You've got all food related companies, I think, at this point. You also had legit provisions. What was legit provisions?
Not yet. We didn't have legit
Not
yet.
yet.
Mm-mm.
Okay. Legit provisions was your company in Napa.
That's right.
Got it. So you had your catering company then.
Yep, had the catering company called Get Happy Catering, had Happy Food Company, and COVID hit, and we obviously stopped all events, and had to lay off 24 people, our entire staff.
What was that like?
It was one of the worst days that I can recall in the business,
Mm,
because as an entrepreneur, your job is not only to come up with all these fun, awesome ideas and implement them, but you're providing security for the people that you employ. And having to let those people go was awful.
mm. Um, at the same time, so you have the meal kit company. Did that suffer as well? Because
It
or no,
did. We tried to keep it afloat, but we couldn't make it happen. So
it didn't.
we had investors and advisors, and they all said it's time. You're gonna have to let it go. And so we
Mm.
did. We closed that.
Was part of that because of competition that had come in from the larger ones like Blue Aprons and stuff like that?
A little bit, a little bit. And COVID saved those Meal Kit by Meals company, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, it was just we couldn't sustain it, and so we closed the doors in May. And I moved to Napa Valley a couple weeks later.
Wow, big life change.
Yeah,
And for someone who's crazy about farm to table food, that's kind of the epicenter of that whole movement, isn't it?
that's right. Well, that's where I had gone to culinary school. Gosh, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, a long time ago. And so I knew I always wanted to come back to the Napa
Mm,
Valley area. And I thought, why not? And so I did. And while we had a Happy Food Company, we had developed the concept for legit provisions. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to go there and I'm going to launch this new concept. And everyone said, you can't do that. You can't move during COVID and open a new business. But I did anyway.
You had a really interesting idea. Tell us about. I think you had like a club or membership club or something like that.
Yeah,
Card.
yeah. So Legit Provisions was a grab and go market concept, completely COVID friendly. So we classified ourselves as a grocery store, not a restaurant, so that we would be deemed essential. And you could do a self checkout on a kiosk. So
Mm.
when they mandated grab and go or delivery only, we already had the model and the technology in place. But yeah, again, I moved here and I didn't know anyone. So how do you build a network? How do you get people to come in the door when you don't have a community? And so we started a VIP program, and we asked those people if they would be a VIP in our store and pay us $250 a year, you would get a free drink. And they became our most important advocates. Those group of people came in every week. They brought their friends, they brought their kids, so they could get their free drink. But then, of course, they bought other things.
Something tells me you don't shy away from sales, but I have to point out that yet again, a whole nother different buyer. We went from moms with kids to school districts to retailers to whoever hires a catering company to now we have John Q. Shopper just walking off the street coming into a grab and go market.
Yeah, direct to consumer retail, which I again knew nothing about.
What's the through line behind this? Any secrets to selling to such a different variety of array of different types of buyers?
I think the secret is finding a need in the market. So everything we did, we were just a little bit ahead of the curve. Like I felt this people were going to want this before they really realized that they were going to want it. And we also the grab and go, having a touchless free kiosk. I mean, we had developed that a year before COVID hit. So yeah, I mean, it's just really neat to look around and say, what is missing in this market, and how can I help provide that?
Hmm. So you say you developed that a year before COVID hit. So was this on the roadmap for you? Was that something you were envisioning doing a grab and go market type of thing
Yes,
before
yes, we were.
in Napa, or was that something you were going to do in Kansas City?
We talked about doing it in Kansas City, but in the back of my mind, I always kind of
Had the
wanted
idea.
to go do it in Napa. Mhm.
What was that like for you going from COVID hits in March? So we're talking March, April, May. By May, 60 days later, you're in a completely new city. You have to close down a couple of businesses, lay off a group of people, and you're in a new town, starting a new business. That is a phenomenal amount of change in a short period of time.
It was. It I'm not gonna lie, it was scary. And people kept saying, "Well, who are you doing this with? Who's helping you?" And I was like, "Well, what do you mean? I got my dog. Got my dog Cooper. He helps me."
Yeah, yeah. Well, in a sense, you've done it many times before, not with the backdrop of a global pandemic, but started in new industries, started new companies, not knowing anything before. So it seems like maybe there's a comfort to that for you.
Yeah, I love creating something from nothing. I get energy, and that's my passion, is developing things that may not already exist.
What's the next? Actually, before I get to that, so you were involved, I believe, in EO in Kansas City, right?
Yes.
So you switched to the San Francisco chapter. What was that like for you as you joined a new chapter in a new town?
So great, so great. And part of the reason I did that was not only because I love EO and everything that it brings, but I needed to build my community in the Bay Area. I didn't have that. And so EO has been instrumental in building that community for me.
And what does EO give for you more holistically, globally, beyond just joining the new chapter, but the years that you've been a part of it? What would you say to some entrepreneur out there listening to this who considering being a part of it?
Just continual learning. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years, and every time I go to an EO event or network with somebody, I always learn something new. Just their professional and personal development is amazing for me.
Mm. Kiersten, this has been great. Where can people go to reach out or inquire or ask you about some things that you mentioned in this interview?
Yeah, legitprovisions.com. Our website is still active as we're waiting to open a new location in Napa. Or you can reach me directly at chefk@legitprovisions.com.
Chef K, thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.